Lena and I had always loved camping. It was our escape from the monotony of work, the city, and everything in between. We had been to countless trails, set up camp in deep forests, beside lakes, even near old mining towns. We considered ourselves seasoned. We thought we'd seen it all. We were wrong. Hollow Creek Forest was supposed to be just another weekend getaway. We had read about Crescent Ridge Trail, a lesser-known but well-rated hiking route leading to a remote Ridgeview campsite. The pictures online showed a peaceful, open glade, flanked by towering pines. It seemed perfect. We left early Saturday morning, our truck packed with supplies, spirits high. The air smelled fresh and the autumn chill made the drive pleasant. It wasn't until we got deeper into the forest that I noticed something strange. An SUV was parked on the side of the road, partially hidden by the trees. The passenger door was slightly ajar, just enough to be noticeable. No one was inside. I slowed down, glancing at Lena. Weird, right? She nodded. Maybe someone just forgot to close it. I pulled over, stepped out, and shut the door, wiping the rainwater off my hands. The inside of the car was a mess. Clothes, papers, even an old camping stove tossed across the back seat. Something about it unsettled me, but I shook it off. We had a trail to reach. The hike up Crescent Ridge was uneventful at first. The deeper we went, the quieter the forest became. The wind barely rustled the leaves, and we hadn't seen another hiker all morning. It was too still. When we reached the Ridgeview campsite, the first thing we noticed was the tent. It was a small single-person tent zipped up tight. No fire pit, no backpack, no sign of its owner. Just sitting there untouched. Lena frowned. "Where's the camper?" "Probably out hiking," I suggested, though something felt off. The sky darkened as rain began to fall. We hurriedly set up our tent at the far end of the clearing, putting some space between us and the silent, ownerless tent. Then we heard them. Two men walking out from between the trees. They didn't look like hikers. Their clothes were too clean, their shoes spotless despite the muddy trail. Matthew and Owen, they introduced themselves. They spoke politely, but something in their demeanor felt rehearsed, unnatural, like they were mimicking human interaction rather than participating in it. "We've been camping here a few days," Matthew said, his voice too even, too casual. "But," Lena nudged me, her hand gripping my wrist. "Their tent was far too small for two people. They should have been soaked, but they weren't. Their hair was completely dry, their faces clean despite the drizzle. Something about their smiles was wrong." We made small talk for a moment before they returned to their tent, moving in perfect sync. I turned to Lena. "Did that feel off to you?" She nodded, whispering, "I don't think they were ever inside that tent." Night fell. The rain kept coming. We ate quietly inside our tent, listening to the steady drumming against the fabric. Every so often I unzipped a corner of the tent to glance outside. The small tent in the clearing was open now. Empty. A shiver ran down my spine. I woke Lena. "They're not in their tent." She sat up, rubbing her eyes. "Where are they?" Before I could answer, we heard them, whispering. Just beyond the thin walls of our tent, voices murmured. At first I thought it was Matthew and Owen, but then a third voice joined in, low, wrong, garbled. My stomach dropped. There had only been two men. I reached for the pocket knife in my bag, my breath shallow. I slowly unzipped the tent and peeked outside. Three figures stood at the edge of the trees, still, watching. I couldn't see their faces in the darkness, but I felt their gaze. One of them whistled. I don't remember grabbing Lena's arm. I just remember running. We bolted from the tent, our feet sinking into the wet earth. The whispering had stopped, replaced by something worse. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, following us. The whistling continued, low and drawn out, like a hunter signaling to its prey. Lena was crying, her breaths ragged. I could barely think, barely process what was happening. Then through the trees I saw it, the SUV. We sprinted toward it, slipping on the wet ground. I yanked the driver's door open, shoving Lena inside. Then I froze. The passenger door was open again, the same way I had found it earlier. I glanced at the forest. The figures stood just beyond the tree line, waiting. I jumped into the driver's seat and slammed the locks down, fumbling with the keys. My fingers felt numb, my mind reeling. Something moved in the back seat, a low exhale. I turned. The back seat was empty, but the seatbelt was stretched out, as if something had just been sitting there. I lost it. I gunned the engine and tore out of. There, the truck's tires sliding on the slick ground. In the rearview mirror, I saw the figure step out of the trees. Not chasing, just watching. We found a gas station miles down the road and called the police. They met us there, took our statement, and sent a unit up to the campsite. 2 days later, an officer called us back. The SUV belonged to a man reported missing the week before. His belongings were still in the car, but his body was never found. The tent at the campsite was his. The footprints they found did not match just 2 men. And when I asked about the whistling, the officer hesitated. Then he said, "Other people have heard it too. I don't know what we saw that night. I don't know who or what Matthew and Owen were. And I don't know why I keep hearing that whistle in my dreams." I've spent most of my adult life traveling. My blog had taken me across cities, mountains, and forests, but there was something special about Whispering Pines Forest. Maybe it was its untouched wilderness, or maybe it was the way people talked about it, like a place you entered but never truly left. I had wrapped up an assignment early and had a full day to kill before my next flight. A quick search showed a secluded trail deep in the forest, with only a handful of mentions online. Perfect. It was already mid-afternoon when I arrived at the trailhead. The sun, pale and weak behind thick clouds, cast a washed-out glow over the towering pines. The place was unnervingly silent except for the occasional rustling leaves. No other hikers, no birds. Just me and my footsteps crunching against the damp earth. A mile in, I spotted something unexpected. A cabin, old, rotting. Its door was slightly open. I wasn't sure why, but I felt a deep, immediate unease. The kind of instinctual fear that creeps into your bones before your mind catches up. I took a step closer, peering inside. Nothing. Just an empty room, dust and decay clinging to the walls. Still, something felt wrong, like I was being watched from within the darkness. I backed away. A little over an hour later, I saw him. At first, just a shape among the trees, a man leaning against a fallen log. He sat still, head slightly tilted as if he'd been waiting for me. "Didn't think anyone else would be out here," he said, smiling. His teeth were too white. He introduced himself as Sam, claimed he was hiking the same trail but had been here before. He spoke like we already knew each other. Too familiar, too comfortable. "Where are you staying?" he asked. I hesitated. "Just exploring for the day," I said, keeping my voice neutral. His smile widened. "You sure about that?" I didn't answer. Instead, I muttered a quick goodbye and picked up my pace. 20 minutes later, I glanced over my shoulder. Sam was gone. Something felt off. My backpack felt lighter. I checked my supplies. My energy bars were missing. I knew I hadn't eaten them. My stomach was growling. Then I saw it. A tree trunk, carved with deep, jagged letters. "I see you, Alex." I froze. No one knew I was here. I spun around, heart pounding. The forest was still. The silence pressed down on me. I tried to shake it off. Maybe I had seen it wrong. Maybe someone had written it ages ago. Maybe. Then I saw another carving. "Don't go back." I turned and started walking. Fast. The sun was dipping below the trees. I should have been near the end of the trail by now, but I wasn't. The path was wrong. The trees looked the same no matter how far I walked. My footprints should have marked my way, but the ground behind me was undisturbed. Panic gnawed at my ribs. I was being led in circles. Then, ahead of me, he stood there. Sam smiling, blocking the trail. I grabbed the small pocket knife from my backpack. "How do you know my name?" I demanded. His smile didn't change. "I know a lot about you." He took a step forward. I took a step back. Then I ran. Branches whipped against my skin. I didn't care. I ran until my lungs burned. Somehow I found myself back at the cabin. I hadn't turned in this direction. I hadn't meant to come back. The door was wide open now. Inside, a single chair faced the doorway. A piece of paper sat on it. My hands shook as I picked it up. It was a printed page from my blog, the last post, dated yesterday. I hadn't uploaded anything in over a week, then scrawled in black ink across the page, "I'm glad you came back." The sound of footsteps behind me. I turned, slashing blindly with my knife. A struggle, a grunt, a flash of Sam's 2 white teeth, then silence. He wasn't there anymore. The night was long. I barricaded the door with broken furniture. Every creak, every whisper of wind against the walls made my skin crawl. I checked my phone. No service. The battery icon flickered red. I fought sleep, but exhaustion won. And then, at some point in the night, a soft knock on the door. 3 times. Then a voice, my own voice. "Alex, open the door." I pressed my back against the wall. Knife gripped so tight my fingers ached. The knock came again. Then silence. I didn't sleep after that. The sun rose, and with it, the sound of voices. Distant, but real. Rescue. I stumbled out of the cabin, half mad, with relief. 2 park rangers approached. I tried to tell them about Sam, the carvings, the stolen food. Then one of them asked, "Who's Sam?" They hadn't seen anyone else. No footprints but mine. No other campsites. And inside the cabin, the chair was gone. The note was gone. My own blog post? Never existed. The last thing, the year. Ranger said before leading me out. "You're lucky we found you. We don't let people hike here anymore." I asked why. He hesitated, then said, "Because no one ever hikes alone in Whispering Pines. But sometimes they think they do." The whistling wind carried a whisper. I turned. Between the trees, Sam was standing there, smiling, and then he disappeared. Camping alone wasn't new to me. I had done it plenty of times before, and I loved the peace of it. No noise, no distractions, just me and the wilderness. That's why I had chosen Shadowmoor Woods for the weekend. It was off the beaten path, rarely visited, and exactly the kind of place I needed to clear my head. I had been dealing with too much stress. Work, relationships, life in general. Getting away from everything felt like the best option. I had packed light, a tent, some food, water, a flashlight, a knife, and my old notebook. I liked to jot things down when I was alone. It helped organize my thoughts. The hike-in was longer than I expected. The trail wound through thick trees, and the deeper I went, the quieter everything became. By the time I reached a small clearing near a creek, the sun was already dipping low. The spot was perfect, secluded, shaded, and had just enough space to set up camp. But something about the place felt off. It wasn't anything obvious. The air just felt too still. The trees didn't sway as much as they should have with the breeze, and I hadn't seen or heard a single animal since stepping off the main trail. No birds, no insects, nothing. I ignored it. I told myself it was just my mind adjusting to the quiet. I set up my tent, started a small fire, and made a quick meal. By the time I finished eating, the sky had gone dark. I sat by the fire, listening to the crackling flames. That's when I first noticed it, the sound of movement. Not far, maybe 20 feet away. It was slow, deliberate, like footsteps. I turned my flashlight toward the trees. Nothing. I listened for another minute, but the sound was gone. Probably an animal, maybe a deer. I went inside my tent, zipped it up, and lay down. At some point, I must have drifted off. I woke up suddenly. I didn't know why at first. Then I heard it. A whisper. It was so faint I thought I had imagined it, but then it came again. I couldn't make out words, just the shape of them. A voice right outside my tent. I held my breath. I listened. Nothing. I slowly reached for my flashlight and flicked it on. Then I unzipped the tent, just enough to peek out. The fire had died down to embers. The woods were still. I scanned the trees, searching for movement, but everything was just as I had left it. And yet something felt different. I stepped out, my boots crunching against the dirt. I walked a slow circle around the campsite, shining, my light between the trees. Still nothing. Maybe I had been dreaming. Maybe the wind had carried some distant sound that my half-asleep mind turned into whispers. I went back inside the tent, but I did not sleep. Morning came with no more disturbances, but I still felt uneasy. I made coffee, sat by the creek, and tried to shake the feeling. Then I noticed something. My notebook. It was open. I knew for a fact that I had closed it before going to sleep. But there it was. Pages fluttering slightly in the breeze. And there was writing on the page. A single word, scrawled in shaky letters. Stay. I felt my stomach drop. I hadn't written that. My first thought was that someone had been in my tent, that they had crept into my campsite while I slept, flipped through my notebook and left me a message. I scanned the area, looking for footprints, disturbed dirt, anything. But the ground looked the same. Maybe I had written it down absent-mindedly the night before. Maybe I had forgotten. Or maybe I was trying to make sense of something that didn't make sense. I needed to clear my head. I packed a small bag, grabbed my map, and set off down one of the side trails, hoping that a few hours of hiking would shake the feeling. The farther I walked, the worse it got. I kept seeing movement from the corner of my eye, small, quick shifts between the trees. But every time I turned, nothing was there. Then I saw the carvings. At first, it was just one, a strange spiral symbol etched into the bark of a tree. Then I saw another, and another. Symbols scratched into tree trunks, rocks, even the dirt. Some looked old, like they had been there for years. Others were fresh, and then I found one with my name, Jordan. The letters were deep, jagged, carved recently. My body went cold. This was wrong. Someone was following me, watching me. I turned and walked quickly back to camp. The moment I stepped into my clearing, I stopped. Something was wrong. My tent was open. I hadn't left it that way. Rushed forward, heart pounding. Inside, my backpack was gone, but sitting where I had been sleeping was something else. A leather-bound journal. It wasn't mine. My hands shook as I picked it up. The pages were filled with entries, some faded, some fresh. Different handwriting, different people. One entry caught my eye. August 4th, 1987. The whispers don't stop. They get closer at night. I tried to leave. They won't let me. Another, dated 3 years later. June 12th, 1990. The woods change when you aren't looking. Trails don't lead where they should. Don't trust what you see. October 3rd, 2023. If you find this, it means they let me go. But they won't let you. My hands went numb. That date, 2 days ago. That's when I heard the whisper. Right behind me. I ran. I ran faster than I had ever run in my life. The woods blurred past me. The symbols flashed in my vision, burned into every tree I passed. The forest did not look the same anymore. The paths did not lead where they should. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. Then up ahead, I saw someone standing between the trees, still, watching. At first, I thought it was a person. Then I saw the face. It was my own, and then everything went dark. I woke up on the roadside. A passing driver had spotted me stumbling out of the woods, covered in dirt and scratches, looking like I had been lost for days. But I hadn't. Had I? I tried to tell people what happened. The whispers, the carvings, the journal. But when I checked my pack, it wasn't there. When I checked the map, Shadowmoor Woods wasn't listed anymore. No one believed me. But I know the truth. I left the woods, but they did not forget me.